The interview was calm, until a voice from off-camera brought everything to a halt. When Melania Trump interrupted Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett live on air, no one expected the powerful exchange that followed. What came next left the former First Lady visibly unsettled and the audience silent in disbelief. The cameras were already rolling. Bright studio lights cast a warm, professional glow across the polished set. Seated confidently in her chair, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was delivering a sharp, passionate message about accountability and political privilege. Her words carried precision and conviction. "The truth is, we can't keep pretending that some people haven't benefited from silence," she said. "When power protects the comfortable and punishes the outspoken, that's a problem." The interviewer, a seasoned journalist known for handling intense political discussions, leaned forward to respond. But before he could speak, a firm voice cut through the studio. "Excuse me, stop right there." The words sliced through the air. Everyone froze. The sound hadn't come from the stage. It came from somewhere just off camera. Producers in the control booth leaned forward in alarm. Cameramen turned their heads. Even the usually unshaken studio staff stopped moving. Jasmine Crockett's eyes narrowed as she glanced to the side. From behind one of the sound curtains, a figure appeared, heels clicking against the floor. Melania Trump stepped forward, wearing a crisp white pantsuit and a composed expression that didn't match the tension in the room. She walked with calm precision. Every eye followed her. This wasn't just a surprise visit, it was an interruption. Whether deliberate or emotional, no one could tell. But one thing was clear. No one had expected Melania Trump to appear unannounced during a live interview with a Democratic congresswoman known for her unfiltered honesty. The interviewer, momentarily thrown off, cleared his throat. Mrs. Trump, you're not scheduled to appear today." Melania didn't hesitate. "No, I am not, but I was nearby and heard something I couldn't ignore." Jasmine stayed composed, though her jaw tightened slightly. She turned her chair fully toward Melania, and what exactly was that comment? She asked calmly. Melania stepped closer, her hands lightly clasped. "You said silence protects power, that people like me benefited from it." "That's unfair." The studio fell completely silent. Only the hum of equipment and the faint buzz of the lights could be heard. The host didn't move. The crew barely breathed. Jasmine spoke slowly. "What I said was about systems, about how silence, especially from those with great platforms, can become a tool of power." Melania's voice remained soft, but her words were deliberate. "I understand, but you speak as if I chose comfort. You don't know what I chose or what I sacrificed." Jasmine leaned in slightly. "Maybe I don't, but I do know this. When you stand beside the most powerful man in the world and remain silent while families are separated and women are disrespected, silence becomes a choice." Melania didn't reply right away. For a brief moment, the usually composed First Lady seemed caught off guard. Not by hostility, but by Jasmine's directness. It wasn't anger that filled Jasmine's voice. It was clarity, and that made her words strike harder. The host tried to mediate. "Ladies, perhaps we can..." But neither woman looked his way. Jasmine continued. "I've spent my career being talked over, told I was too emotional or too much. But I'm still here, and I speak not just for myself, but for every woman who's been told to smile and stay quiet while injustice happens in plain sight." Melania straightened slightly. "I did what I thought was right," she said. "And so am I," Jasmine replied firmly. The tension in the room was no longer awkward. It was charged. Two women from vastly different worlds, shaped by entirely different expectations, now faced each other live, unscripted and unplanned. The studio crew stood frozen. Some gripped their clipboards. Others forgot to move. Everyone realized they were witnessing something real, not rehearsed talking points or staged debate. The interviewer looked between them, aware this was far from over. But what no one knew, not the host, not the crew, not even Melania, was that by stepping in to defend her silence, she was about to face a level of accountability no one had ever demanded of her before. And as Jasmine Crockett sat poised in her chair, the quiet aftershock filled the studio. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even move. Instead, Jasmine sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on Melania Trump, her calm gaze daring her to step closer. The moment wasn't just about two women facing each other. It represented something larger. Two worlds, two struggles, now colliding on a stage neither of them had planned for. The interviewer, caught in a situation far beyond his usual studio debates, tried to step in. "Perhaps we should," Jasmine lifted a hand, silencing him without a word. "I'm not going to be spoken over today," she said firmly, her tone sharp but composed. "Not by a man, and certainly not by you, Mrs. Trump." Melania raised an eyebrow but stayed composed. "I didn't come here to argue. I came because what you said was unfair, and I believe I have the right to respond." Jasmine offered a faint, unimpressed smile. Unfair? That's an interesting word from someone who stood in one of the world's most privileged positions and said almost nothing for 4 years. "I spoke when it mattered." "Really?" Jasmine asked, tilting her head slightly. "Was the time not right when families were being separated at the border? Or when your husband insulted women, mocked veterans, and questioned the citizenship of a black president? How many right moments passed you by?" The silence that followed was heavy. This was no longer just an awkward exchange. It had become a deeper confrontation between two public figures divided by power, race, and silence. Melania's face stayed calm, though her hands tightened together. "You don't know what I went through," she said quietly. "I was attacked no matter what I did, for my accent, my past, my choices." Jasmine nodded slightly. "And I'm not saying that was right," she replied, slowly standing. "But when you're given a platform that large, silence stops being protection. It becomes participation." The room fell completely still. Jasmine took a step forward, not in aggression, but with confidence. "I grew up in a country where people like me were told to stay quiet, to wait our turn, to not cause trouble. And I didn't listen. I stood up. I ran for office. And now, I speak for those who are still unheard." Melania rose too, now face to face with Jasmine, only a few feet apart, but separated by miles of experience. "You speak about noise," Melania said, keeping her tone measured. "But sometimes noise is just that, noise. People shout so much that no one listens anymore." "No," Jasmine replied firmly. "People are shouting because they've been ignored for too long. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment. We speak, or we disappear." A pause followed. Melania glanced toward the crew, perhaps searching for understanding, but no one moved. The control room gave no signal. This wasn't television anymore. It was truth reflected back, and it was uncomfortable to face. "I didn't come here to be attacked," Melania said finally. "And I didn't come here to be interrupted," Jasmine responded evenly. "But here we are." It wasn't loud or chaotic. It was calm confrontation, the kind that leaves a lasting mark. Melania Trump had entered the set, expecting to defend her silence, maybe to reclaim control of her image. What she hadn't anticipated was meeting someone unafraid to challenge the space between silence and survival. "I represent people who don't get second chances," Jasmine said quietly. "People who don't get to walk into rooms like this without being questioned, searched, or dismissed." And with that, the studio remained frozen. Two women standing in stillness, each representing a different side of power. When you walk in here uninvited to defend your silence, you're not just addressing me, you're speaking to everyone who's ever been told they're too outspoken for telling the truth. Melania didn't reply. For the first time, she seemed uncertain. Not defeated, but unsettled. Jasmine calmly returned to her chair, sat down, and refocused on the host. "Now," she said evenly, "we can continue the interview. Unless Mrs. Trump would actually like to answer the question I started with." The host blinked, trying to regain composure. "Right, let's continue." Melania didn't exit the set, but the energy in the room had shifted. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just stood her ground, she had drawn a boundary. And Melania had unknowingly crossed it, unprepared for what that meant. Melania remained standing, her earlier confidence replaced with a more cautious posture. She was still composed and elegant, but her words no longer carried their intended weight. What was meant to be a clarification had turned into a Confrontation, Jasmine. Crockett wasn't just responding. She was demanding accountability from someone long shielded by silence. I don't think you understand, Melania said finally, breaking the pause. It's easy to speak when the cameras favor you, when the world expects you to talk. I was judged harshly no matter what I did. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her tone steady. You were judged, yes. But people lose their jobs, even their lives, for speaking truth. You had an international platform, a press team. Do you know what some of us would have given for just 1 minute of that visibility? Melania didn't answer right away. She moved toward the far end of the set, resting her hand on the back of an empty chair as if to steady herself. You assume I had control, she said quietly, that I could speak freely any time I wanted. You don't understand the barriers around me. You're right, Jasmine replied. I don't know your barriers, but I know mine. I know what it's like to walk into a room and have to prove yourself again and again, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. Melania looked back. So now we're comparing struggles? Jasmine shook her head. No, we're comparing choices. That struck a chord. The conversation had moved beyond politics. It was about experience. Two women from completely different worlds. One had lived beside immense power, expected to smile and remain silent. The other had fought her way into Congress, carrying the weight of stereotypes and double standards with every step. Melania stepped back toward the center of the stage, her heels softly echoing on the studio floor. I tried to focus on kindness, she said. My Be Best initiative was about supporting children and promoting respect. That mattered to me. Jasmine didn't dismiss her. Instead, she asked, then why didn't we hear your voice when families were being separated? Why stay silent when your husband insulted entire communities? Be Best isn't just a slogan. It's a duty. For a brief moment, emotion flickered across Melania's face. Not anger, not guilt, but something harder to define. Perhaps recognition of an opportunity lost. You don't think I wanted to speak more? She asked softly. You don't think I had moments when I was screaming inside? Jasmine rose slowly. Then you understand us. We scream inside every day, when laws strip away rights, when voices like mine go unheard. The difference is we don't have the option to stay silent. Melania didn't argue. She met Jasmine's gaze quietly. You had the platform. You had the seat. And every time you chose silence, that silence spoke for you. Silence was easier than truth, Jasmine said, stepping forward. I get it. It's simpler that way, but it comes at a cost. And the ones paying that cost aren't sitting beside world leaders. They're in cages, hospitals, on the streets. The studio went completely quiet. Even the cameras seemed to hum softer, as if acknowledging the weight of the moment. Melania finally spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. You think I didn't carry that with me? Jasmine softened slightly, not out of pity, but from recognition that this moment was real. Then say it, she urged. Say it matters now. Say it mattered then. Say it louder than you ever have before. For the first time, Melania's expression wavered. Vulnerability flickered in her eyes. She didn't look like the First Lady. She looked like someone unexpectedly held accountable, in public. I regret some things, she said quietly. I should have said more. It wasn't a full confession, not a sweeping apology. But it was enough to shift the energy in the room. Jasmine nodded slowly. Thank you. That's a start. Neither woman had won anything. This wasn't a debate. It was something messier, more human, a rare, honest moment in a world obsessed with polished answers. Melania may have arrived intending to set the record straight, but she realized something else entirely. Speaking up doesn't make you a target. It makes you accountable. And even the best-intentioned silence still leaves others to carry the burden. Her quiet words, I should have said more, lingered in the air like smoke from a fire long extinguished. The room wasn't buzzing, it wasn't applauding. It was listening, truly listening, and that silence carried more weight than any press release or headline she had ever been part of. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't offer praise or pity. She stood with her arms gently crossed, letting the moment settle. Regret, she said slowly, isn't weakness. What you do next, that defines you. Melania nodded slightly, uncertain whether to speak again or wait. For the first time, she wasn't controlling the space. She was just present, unsure how to move. The interviewer cleared his throat, sensing a chance to return to familiar territory. Congresswoman Crockett, if I may, what would you want to hear from someone like Mrs. Trump today? What does real accountability look like to you? Jasmine didn't hesitate. Truth, she said, not polished statements, not half apologies from behind podiums. I want to hear someone say, I could have done better, and I will do better now. Even if it's late. She looked directly at Melania. Late is better than never, but late doesn't bring applause. It brings action. Melania lowered her gaze briefly, absorbing the words like medicine. She wasn't used to being addressed this way, not by hosts, journalists, or public officials who didn't know her. I was raised to be quiet, Melania said at last, to keep things inside. Speaking too loudly was dangerous, and when I married into this life, I thought maybe silence would keep me safe. Jasmine nodded. I understand, but safety for one can mean danger for many. When you are that close to power, your silence becomes a wall others have to climb just to be heard. The interviewer wisely stayed quiet, sensing something more raw unfolding. Melania's voice softened almost to a whisper. There were nights I'd lie awake wondering if people misunderstood me. If they thought I didn't care. Jasmine responded firmly, not coldly. They didn't misunderstand you. They couldn't understand you because you didn't let them. It was a turning point, not a dramatic collapse, not a confrontation, but a slow unraveling of years of unspoken tension. This wasn't about a press conference or a single policy anymore. It was about how power can shield people from the truth, and how those on the outside bear the consequences. Melania slowly sat down in the chair across from Jasmine. It wasn't planned. It wasn't polished. It was human. I thought I was protecting myself, she said quietly, but maybe I was just protecting a world that didn't want to hear the truth. And that world still exists, Jasmine replied. But every time someone like you speaks, really speaks, you chip away at it. You make room for someone else to say what they couldn't before. Melania looked at her, no longer defensive. And what about you? How do you keep speaking even when they try to silence you? Jasmine didn't blink. Silence isn't a luxury I was ever given. I either speak or I vanish, and I'm not going anywhere. The two women sat there, neither enemies nor allies, but mirrors, each reflecting a different kind of pain, a different kind of burden, and perhaps, just perhaps, the first sparks of understanding. Maybe it's not too late, Melania said. Jasmine nodded. It never is if you're willing to do more than just talk. It was a rare moment. Two women from completely different worlds. One shaped by elegance and restraint, the other by grit and defiance, finding a fragile thread of common ground. It wasn't agreement. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was acknowledgement. In a world of rehearsed speeches and filtered statements, that alone was revolutionary. No chords, no applause signs, just truth. Sometimes, that's enough to change a room. The cameras were still on, but the scene no longer felt like a broadcast. This wasn't a segment. It was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett leaned back in her chair, composed but alert, while Melania Trump sat across from her, far removed from the guarded image she once presented as First Lady. There were no speechwriters, no polished filters from a press secretary, just two women, face to face with nothing left to hide behind. The studio lights hummed softly. Crew members froze at the edges, unsure whether to step in or let the moment breathe. Everyone could feel it. Something rare was happening. Not drama for ratings, not a soundbite, but clarity. Melania looked around the room, catching the gaze of a young woman on the crew. Perhaps a producer or assistant, watching with wide, thoughtful eyes. Maybe she reminded Melania of herself, once young and uncertain in a foreign place, learning to speak in a room full of people who never listened. I want to do better, Melania said at last. The words were slow, hesitant, but sincere. Jasmine studied her carefully. She'd seen thousands of promises made on camera, most forgotten the moment the lights dimmed. But this felt different. Not redemption, not resolution, just real. You can start by listening, Jasmine said. Not just to me, but to the people you've never had to think about. The ones who didn't grow up behind security gates. The ones who've never had the luxury of being silent. Melania nodded slowly. I used to think being neutral was the right thing, she said. But now I see it only protects the strong. And it costs the rest of us, Jasmine replied. The interviewer, who had remained respectfully silent for much of the exchange, finally spoke. The interview had been calm until a voice from the shadows stopped everything. When Melania Trump interrupted Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett live on air, no one expected the fierce response that followed. What happened next left the former First Lady visibly shaken and the audience stunned. The cameras were already rolling. Bright studio lights bathed the polished set in a warm professional glow. Seated confidently, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was deep into a sharp, passionate response about accountability and political power. Her words cut through the air with clarity and precision. And the truth is, she said, we can't keep pretending that certain people haven't benefited from silence. When power shields the comfortable and punishes the outspoken, we have a serious problem. The interviewer, a seasoned host known for handling even the most heated political discussions, leaned forward to respond. But before he could speak, a voice cut sharply through the studio. Excuse me, stop right there. The words sliced the air. Everyone froze. The sound didn't come from the stage. It came from somewhere off camera, unexpected. Producers in the control booth jolted. Cameramen turned sharply. Even the studio assistants, usually unflappable, froze completely. Jasmine Crockett's eyes narrowed, and she glanced to the side. From behind one of the sound curtains, a figure emerged, heels clicking on the studio floor. Melania Trump, wearing a striking white pantsuit, stepped forward with a calm expression that contrasted the tension in the room. She walked with deliberate, unhurried poise. Every eye was on her. The atmosphere shifted immediately. This was more than a surprise appearance. It was an interruption, whether calculated or emotional. No one could tell. But one thing was clear. No one expected Melania Trump to appear unannounced during a live interview with a Democratic Congresswoman known for her unflinching commentary. The interviewer, momentarily caught off guard, cleared his throat. Mrs. Trump, you're not on the schedule today." Melania didn't flinch. "No, I am not. But I was nearby and I couldn't let that comment go unanswered." Jasmine stayed composed, jaw tightening slightly. She turned her chair to fully face the former First Lady. Her voice was calm but firm. And what comment was that exactly? Melania stepped closer, hands lightly clasped. "You said silence protects power. That people like me benefited from silence. That is unfair." The studio fell silent, broken only by the low hum of lights and the soft hiss of live microphones. The host didn't move. The crew didn't blink. Jasmine spoke slowly. "What I said was about systems. About how silence, strategic silence, can be a tool, especially when the person staying silent has a platform the rest of us can only dream of." "I know what you meant," Melania replied softly. Her accent noticeable, but her words weighted. "But you speak as if I chose comfort. You don't know what I chose. You don't know what I gave up." Jasmine leaned in. "And maybe I don't, but I do know this. When you stand beside the most powerful man in the world and say nothing while families are torn apart and women are dismissed or disrespected, silence becomes a choice." Melania didn't answer immediately. For a moment, the poised former First Lady seemed caught off guard, not by hostility, but by the directness of it. Jasmine spoke with clarity, not anger, and that made it hit harder. The host tried to intervene. "Ladies, perhaps we can—" Neither woman acknowledged him. Jasmine continued. "I've spent my career being talked over, interrupted, told I was too aggressive, too emotional, too much, but I'm still here. I speak not just for myself, but for every woman told to smile and be quiet while injustice unfolded right in front of them." Melania straightened her shoulders. "I did what I thought was right." "And so am I," Jasmine replied. The tension wasn't awkward anymore. It was electric. Two women, from entirely different backgrounds, public figures measured by different standards, facing off live, unscripted, with no warning. The studio crew watched in stunned silence. Some gripped clipboards tighter. Others just froze, forgetting their roles. Everyone knew they were witnessing something rare. Not a staged debate, not pre-approved talking points. This was raw. The interviewer looked between the two women, realizing this exchange was far from over. He could sense that this wasn't over. But no one knew. Not the host, not the crew, not even Melania herself, that by stepping in to defend her silence, she was about to face accountability in a way few had ever dared. Jasmine Crockett didn't rise from her chair. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She remained perfectly still, eyes locked on Melania Trump, silently daring her to step closer. The weight of the moment wasn't just two women confronting each other. It was about everything they represented. Two different worlds. Two different struggles colliding on a stage neither had planned for. The interviewer, caught in the middle of something far larger than a typical broadcast segment, tried to interject. Perhaps we should... Jasmine raised a single hand, cutting him off without a word. I'm not going to be spoken over today, she said firmly, her voice clear and unwavering. Not by a man, and definitely not by you, Mrs. Trump. Melania arched an eyebrow but stayed calm. I'm not here to argue. I came because you said something unfair, and I felt I had the right to respond. Jasmine smiled, tight-lipped, unamused. Unfair? That's an interesting word coming from someone who occupied one of the most privileged positions in the world and said almost nothing for 4 years. I said what needed to be said when the time was right. Really? Jasmine tilted her head. Was the time not right when families were being torn apart at the border? Or when your husband mocked women, insulted veterans, and questioned the citizenship of a black president? How many right times did you let pass by? The tension thickened. This was no longer just an uncomfortable moment. It was a confrontation decades in the making. Two public figures on opposite ends of power. Race and silence. Melania's expression stayed composed, but her fingers clasped a little tighter. You don't know what I went through. I was criticized no matter what I did. People called me names, attacked me for my accent, my past. And I'm not saying that was right, Melania said. Jasmine stood slowly. But when you are given a platform that big, silence stops being a shield. It becomes complicity. The room held its breath. Jasmine took a deliberate step forward, not aggressively, but with certainty. I grew up in a country where people like me were told to know our place, to wait our turn, to not make noise. And I didn't listen. I stood up. I ran for office. I speak every day for people who are still ignored. Melania stayed standing too. Now, face to face with Jasmine, separated by only a few feet but what felt like miles of experience. You speak about noise, Melania said, measured. But sometimes noise is just that. People shout so much no one listens anymore. No, Jasmine said sharply. People shout because they've been ignored for too long. We don't have the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment. We speak or we're erased. There was a pause. Melania glanced toward the crew, perhaps searching for validation, but they remained still. This was no longer a show. It was a mirror held up to privilege, and it was uncomfortable to look into. I didn't come here to be attacked, Melania said at last. And I didn't come here to be interrupted, Jasmine replied calmly. But here we are. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't chaos. It was calm confrontation, one of the most unsettling kinds. Melania had entered the set perhaps expecting a quiet rebuttal, a chance to reclaim narrative. What she hadn't expected was someone unafraid to call out the difference between silence and survival. I represent people who don't get second chances, people who can't walk into rooms like this without being questioned, searched or dismissed, Jasmine continued. So when you walk in uninvited to defend your silence, you're speaking to everyone who's ever been told they were too much for speaking truth. Melania didn't answer. For the first time, she seemed unsure. Not defeated, just off balance. Jasmine returned to her chair slowly, turning her attention back to the host. Now, she said calmly, we can continue the interview unless Mrs. Trump would like to answer the question I was originally addressing. The host blinked, still processing. Yes, right. Let's continue. Melania didn't leave the set, but everyone felt the shift. Jasmine Crockett had held her ground and drawn a line. Melania had crossed it, unprepared for what awaited. Her confident stance had faded into caution, almost reservation. She was still poised, still graceful, but her words hadn't landed as intended. What was meant as a correction had become a confrontation, and Jasmine wasn't just pushing back. She was demanding clarity from someone who had long avoided it. "I don't think you understand," Melania said finally.